The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice. We are not financial advisors, and nothing discussed on this podcast should be considered a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any security. All opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should do their own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not indicative of future results.
And now, part 2 of the Value Seville podcast with Calgary Leveen.
Cal, I think just when I think of stock prices, I think of them as, probability weighted distribution of outcomes. Right? And here, and maybe this is just from talking to other investors or people interested in the space, it's almost like this, it's going to land on green or it's going to land on black or red or whichever, pick your poison. And you're going to get the NPRM and they're going to get this 15 megahertz. The stock goes to, something high or not. And the stock goes to zero because there's no asset value and these convertible guys. And it's like it's almost simplified to that. And that's just maybe what I hear. So I'm perfectly acknowledging that I don't really know and not that deep. But is there just like a wider distribution of outcomes here where, maybe it's not 15 megahertz, maybe it's less, maybe it's, like you said, just some great licensing agreement. Is there other things to be thinking about, or is it really these like kind of two cases? Maybe you could just help think through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Donnie, because I think a lot of people, when they don't like this idea, it's because of this perceived binary nature. And I don't really see it as binary. If you want to talk about implied probabilities, I think the stock price, depending on where you think it ends up, I think the stock price right now implies a between 1/3 to 50-50 odds of success. I happen to think the odds are a lot better, but that's kind of where the implied probability is based on today's stock price and how long I think it'll take and what we're likely to get. But look, this is going to be ultimately a negotiation between NextNav and the FCC, between NextNav and their ultimate partner, between NextNav, the FCC, and the opposition. I personally think that the opposition used to have a stronger hand before NextNav made all of its persuasive technical filings. But you make a good point, Donnie. This isn't. I think a lot of investors are kind of thinking about, like a drug approval, like the FDA, where it's either approved or it's not. That isn't really the case here, right? It's more of a fluid process where they're making an ask. They really hope to get everything they're asking for, but it might end up being a little bit different, or they might have to pay some concessions, or maybe there's a windfall on 1.25 megahertz that's coming out of the FCC inventory. There are question marks, but the biggest question mark of all is, will the FCC approve some version of the NextNav petition? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, because if you look at the statements of Brendan Carr about the importance of 5G competitiveness, about getting more spectrum lit up, about national security, I mean, the fact that they launched the notice of inquiry at all, I see as a really great sign. The FCC said, basically put NextNav on pause to explore the topic in depth. So now if they go back and ultimately approve the NextNav petition, they have done their work. They've done their homework. They've followed administrative procedure perfectly. Everybody got a chance to say what they needed to say. They can't be accused of picking favorites. And another point that was brought up previously was alternatives, right? Some of the people, a lot of the opposition say, look, we're all for a backup to GPS, but geez, you don't have to do this one. Like, why not do one of the many other viable solutions? I really encourage people to read the NOI docket, because you can read about eLORAN, you can read about the broadcaster's solution. They all have flaws that make them not viable anytime soon. And so, NextNav has made a presentation last week at the FCC, a slide deck that I encourage everyone to go read. It's kind of their closing argument. And in that, they show that their PNT solution could be active in people's phones during this administration. Brendan Carr has made tweets talking about how the FCC is operating on Trump time. The agenda in August was called No Summer Slowdown. For the first time in living memory, we've got an activist chairman who wants to get stuff done. And the fact that he made comments this week, 2 days ago, to the Chamber of Commerce talking about GPS and the vulnerabilities, I think it shows that the odds that something happens here are way better than 50-50.
And just, I think the next thing would be on timing. How should we think about this? I know there are these, it's like almost every month there's a, I guess an FCC post and then meeting, and, everyone seems to be holding their breath saying, is it going to be on there? Is it not? I mean, what's the way to think about timing? I think that's maybe the more rational approach to that, or at least your way of thinking about it.
If I could just add to that, Calgary, the timing thing, I guess I always like to ask with a stock, idea, like, could my thesis still work out, or could whatever I think's going to happen still happen, but somehow the stock doesn't work, right? And so I guess my question would be, I don't know the numbers, but I know that NextNav is burning cash at the moment. So this thing can't drag on for years before something, potentially needs to be done from a capital raise perspective. Now, I do know a lot of the notes and all that and their warrants that can convert. And in that instance, cash would be coming inside the company. But how do you think about the NPRM, the timing, and then any potential caveat to the NPRN, like we need to do more testing to make sure devices aren't going to be messed with, all these kind of things. How do you think about that timeline vis-a-vis the cash burn and the potential for, some type of dilutive raise that you might be right that they end up going with NextNav, and you might be right about a lot, but that the equity doesn't work out the way you think? How do you quantify that risk and think about timing?
Like you, Jeff, I too have had instances where I was right, but didn't get paid for it.
You know why I ask questions.
Look, timing is very important, and we can talk about kind of the meeting calendar and how I think it works and when I think it works. But your point about the balance sheet is a good one, right? You should look at it. On their last balance sheet, they had 176 million in cash and short-term investments. Their annualized burn rate in the first 6 months of the year was about 50 million a year. So they've got about 3+ years of runway, according to just what they have on hand and the rate they've been burning. I think the first 6 months of this year are a pretty good indication. It's been a very active period, lots of legal bills, lots of consultants, what have you.
Right.
Travel. So I think that that's a fair burn rate. So you've got 3+ years there. With the warrants, and you mentioned the convertible note before, I do treat it as equity because it's in the money.
Mm-hmm.
You can toggle it on and off and look at it both ways, but I think the way to look at it is to treat it as equity. With the warrants, there are warrants outstanding, with strikes from everywhere from, there used to be warrants below $3, but many of those have converted. The warrants in general are from $11.50, the old SPAC warrants, up through $20. There's a range that came with the convertible note, but if they were all to exercise, it would bring in another $321 million.
Okay. So the thing there is if we start to see success, the stock price continues on its path, that these warrants and in the notes will convert. Upon conversion, cash comes inside the company. Cash run raise is extended, essentially, if I understand.
Yeah. Well, no additional cash is going to come from the notes, right? Because that cash is already on the balance sheet. But the liability, it'll be equitized, right? It's not a cash flow item, but it's a balance sheet item.
Right.
And the share count will go up. I'm already counting those shares. The warrants will be a source of cash if we're successful. Once we break above 18, the public warrants become redeemable by the company after a period of time. Also, we can talk about the warrants if you like. They trade publicly. It's a way that I've expressed the trade. I like the warrants a lot. But after you go above 18, the company can redeem the warrants, at which point you either have to exercise or sell. But what it does is it means a lot of cash comes into the company. Okay. And so if we do get the NPRM this year, like I'm saying, likely we're above 18, those warrants will exercise.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe just double click on timing here. Just how to think about it. I think it's kind of a strange case, but maybe just lay it out for us a little bit.
Yeah. So as it stands, there are 3 more shots on goal this year. Basically, there's the October, November, and December meetings. They always announce the agenda 21 days prior. The day prior to that, they post a blog. So the next important date is the 6th of October. You'll find me at my desk.
That's my 47th birthday, the 6th.
Happy.
I hope to give you a good birthday present there, and,
Yeah,
and get
maybe
the
Cal
news
will
you
get your
want,
birthday
right? Yeah.
present.
Happy birthday in advance. The December options expire on my birthday. And so
Yeah.
the combination, this might be a little too in the weeds for folks, but the combinations of the calendar dates and the options market allow you to place your bets with a lot of specificity.
Right, right. So do you expect to get an NPRM by the end of the year? Is that kind of what your base case is? And then if it went beyond the year, would that sort of worry you that one wasn't coming, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I do expect it before the end of the year. I think that the NOI has run its course. I feel like the comment period in the NextNav petition has more than run its course. If you look at the record, NextNav has made exhaustive technical and economic filings supporting its petition. Mariam Saran, NextNav CEO, has said that she doesn't really believe that there's that much more for them to do. I'm getting the impression that NextNav is kind of pencils down. They've made their closing argument, and the best place to see it is in the ex parte that was filed earlier this week. But NextNav doesn't feel like it's the ball's in their court anymore. And there was an ex parte today, but really the opposition isn't really hiring engineers the way they would need to substantively rebut NextNav's technical filings. So I personally believe that the FCC is probably running the NPRM now. I think that might be what was indicated by the ex parte meeting, right? They're getting into the weeds. I think it's a good sign. I also think that Chairman Carr's comment earlier this week about GPS is a good sign. So I do expect it this week. I expect it this year. We've got 3 more meetings. The FCC typically puts out, 2 to 4 big items per agenda, sometimes more. I think of it a little bit as like a queue for a restaurant. I think of Seinfeld episode, the Chinese restaurant Seinfeld episode. It's kind of like we might not be first on the list, but I think that NextNav is on the list, and I think they're getting to it.
Great. Donnie, what else you got on your side, buddy?
No, I'd say Cal is a neophyte naturalist who likes to hit the national parks. I think you did the Anhinga proud today, so really appreciate the work that you've done on this and sharing that with all of us. I certainly learned a lot through this, and
yeah,
absolutely had an interesting time prepping for it as well.
Are you sure? I feel like you guys are letting me off easy.
I'll put one out. I think one of the questions did come up on one of the conference calls with NextNav, where why has nobody done this yet, right? I mean, if the spectrum, these carriers have spectrum, presumably they could do this right now. I guess that's kind of a question. Then, excuse me, why does it have to be? Why do we have to grant NextNav the spectrum? Why not? Why can't the FCC just hold an auction and then, as a requirement, if you bid and win on the spectrum, that you have to carve a certain chunk out and let NextNav do this? Why do we need to grant them this spectrum as opposed to just, hiring them like a government contractor and having them just build it out without doing a big spectrum grant? Maybe I'm not understanding the thesis correctly, but that's something that kind of is floating around up there.
Well, first, like I said a little bit earlier, I mean, NextNav is the largest licensee in this band, right? So to take it and auction it off and keep the proceeds would be a taking. That's kind of like a mugging. Those are property rights.
Does it have to be? Does the PNT technology that they want to implement, does it have to be within this band? I guess that's a question I don't know. Does it have to be right here, or can it go into another, like a mid-band or something? Or does it have to be this band, and therefore they need to do some version of this to make it work? As a neophyte doesn't understand.
I don't know the technical answer to whether this could be done elsewhere. But NextNav is the one with the spectrum and the technology. And also this band is very useful for it. Also, it was set aside specifically for this purpose, right? In the 1990s, the FCC said this is the band for location monitoring service.
Okay.
This band has a long history of being used for location services.
Right.
So, I think also NextNav's technology uses the 5G waveform. So they do go hand in hand. You can't have NextNav without 5G. But I also think that, people say, well, why should the FCC do this? Right? Question, you should invert it and say, why wouldn't the FCC do this? Right? Who are they harming? Right? They get a PNT backup, which we know is important to them. NextNav Department of Transportation tests has come out on top. And also, if you read the detailed submissions from each of these alternatives that could potentially work, like I said previously, either for funding reasons, like they require a lot of capital, or technical reasons, like there's no way to incorporate it in end user devices, they're not realistic. And so I think NextNav is the ready to go option if they want to get something done. But also putting another 15 megahertz into the hands of the carriers for 5G is a huge win for Brendan Carr. He's been talking about the importance of connectivity and to competitiveness for many years. And so I think the all this spectrum ending up in the hands of the carriers is a feature, not a bug, right? This isn't like some unintended side effect.
Right.
It's an important part of why this is a good idea. And so, the only people who have a problem with it are the toll operators, like I said before, and the Part 15 guys. And I think NextNav has made very persuasive arguments that those people aren't even going to be hurt by this.
What and
Just double
the
clicking on their current
railroads too, though,
spectrum.
right?
Yeah.
No, the railroads actually have been quiet. And so when I presented at ValueX Charlottesville in May, I made a slide where I put all the logos of all the opposition people.
Right.
And I kind of had it in my head that the railroads were in opposition. But when I went back through, I couldn't find any of their opposition. And so they've been strangely quiet. And I would also say that that's not like them. Anterix has a petition before the FCC, and the railroads have been fighting them there and have been very vocal. So I think if the railroads had a problem with NextNav, we would have heard from them.
Cal, just double clicking on their current spectrum licenses, my understanding is, or at least there's some comments out there that it may not be as clean as it's suggested, that it's not, that they have all this 14. Is there any issues with the current licenses, and when do they expire? Are we getting up close any deadline that doesn't get re-upped, I guess?
Yeah. So they've renewed many of them. I think this is some things that people have latched onto about it's not an area that I know a ton about, except that it doesn't seem to bother management. Other spectrum industry veterans I've talked to in the past about it say it's kind of a formality. I mean, if you go back and look at EchoStar, right, the FCC was investigating whether EchoStar had met their build-out deadlines or not. Now that EchoStar is selling spectrum, that issue is going away. I think these things are a bit flexible. It's if you're a good citizen, you hang on to your licenses. There are also cases of bad citizens hanging on to their licenses. If you go back and look at, Warren Havens or even like Legato being in bankruptcy, the truth is this has been addressed by the company. I'm not an expert in it, but it doesn't seem to be an issue that's caused management any concern. So
Yeah.
I realize that's not the strongest answer.
No, that's fine. But I guess the other thing is too, I think Miriam did mention on a call that there is a bunch of spec that they could do this today on the current G. And I guess the argument that Jeff and I have talked about is, well, if you could do it on the current 5G, do you have to do it on this particular 5G? Could you just go ahead and do this today? Like, why not do it tomorrow? Why have to go through all these other steps?
So how would that work? You're going to say the government's going to mandate that a private business provides a pro bono service to the country? How does that work?
Well, it could be for a payment. It could be.
Well,
right,
I mean, I guess it wouldn't be pro bono, though. It would be, I guess, and maybe this is my misunderstanding of some of the moving parts here, but why? So I know with the big, beautiful bill, there was like a bunch of spectrum, but with 800 megahertz or some shit that they'll be able to auction off in the future. And so if you earmark part of that spectrum and say 5% of this needs to be used for PNT backup, I guess why couldn't they just do it that way? And then NextNav would get the contract with the government, but they don't. I guess why do they need the big conversion of all this narrowband to broadband, and why the spectrum? I won't call it a gift, but why does that component need to exist to get the other? I guess is not something I'm 100% certain on.
Yeah, I mean, NextNav has kind of presented this as a package deal, and it does work well for NextNav and its shareholders if it works.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine trying to do it another way, right? So saying, all right, NextNav, we're actually going to not grant your request, but we'd really like it if you and your now broke shareholders would use your technology for the public benefit. I don't I don't really see how it would work.
I mean, you still
And
have the
I mean, look, you make a point that maybe 900 isn't where this service is going to live. Perhaps I've never thought about this before, but perhaps okay, TNT wants to do this. They want the 900, and they're willing to do NextNav, but they're gonna do it over a few different bands, or they're gonna do it in the 600 they just bought, or they're gonna do it on the 700 that they already have. I don't know. I haven't thought about
Yeah.
that before.
Well, I think that just goes back to
and
the
I'm just trying to
earlier
think of
question.
ways it doesn't, like the classic
Yeah.
Charlie Munger,
Yeah.
show me where I
Right,
so I never
inverting.
go there kind of thing.
And that's what the earlier question was like, well, is it because of this propagation in urban canyons and being able to permeate
Right.
walls? Is that why this is just so critical to this equation? But I
I
don't
mean,
know if
be the
there's
answer.
other things to that.
it is an excellent band for that purpose. But another way to think about it is just like who gets what. NextNav's proposal, I think, is the situation where everybody gets something they want, right? The government gets a backup to GPS and solves a critical vulnerability that's been highlighted by President Trump since his first term, by the Department of Transportation, by Brendan Carr. This is a highlighted vulnerability that they get to fix. They also get to go back out and say to the American public, we solved this by being aggressive, and this is coming at no cost to taxpayers. I think that if NextNav gets what they want, this isn't some kind of backroom deal. This is something that Brendan Carr and even the president would be happy to talk about, right? It's a very good look. Second, the carriers get more spectrum, right? This is, they've complained for a long time about a spectrum drought. The Big Beautiful Bill did put auctions back on the table, but those are going to take time to line up. We're not really sure exactly what's going to be for sale when and when it could be lit up. And NextNav is also going to be happy to sign off on some form of this because it recognizes their contributions, their technology, their time, right? We're talking about decades of work have gone into this. And so I really think there's something for everybody, and that's where you get a deal done. You can always say, like, well, what if the government just took this from you? And it's like, well, that could happen with a piece of real estate. That could happen with any sort of litigation. I think it's an important what if, but I think people get hung up on it because FCC licenses are kind of not exactly property. These aren't things that are traded, and there's, I believe, a precedent for letting people transact.
Yeah, maybe it's just a stupid question, but why? I mean, why can't they got 14 megahertz? Like, why can't they just do it now? Like, why do they need this other interim step if they've already got this? I mean,
oh yeah, that's an important point, Donnie. So the system that they used in San Francisco to test this in the past, they had to hang radios all over the place, right? And so I think for a long time, the question has been like, okay, well, how do you do this realistically, right? Is NextNav going to raise tens of billions of dollars and put up towers all over the country to provide this service? And also, once you do that, what's the payback? How does it work, right? You're competing with GPS. You're competing with a free service. So it's not exactly a great business model, even if it is in the public interest to do it. So I think it is the type of thing where it's an externality and it's a place where the government probably should step in. Also, that network of towers and radios already exists. It's what the mobile companies use to deliver service to our phones.
Right,
and
right.
the fact that NextNav uses the 5G waveform makes it perfect, right? They don't have to go out and raise a bunch of capital and build new towers. They're already there. And so they need a partner organization to let them use their towers and radios. What's in it for the partner? Well, they get a bunch of new spectrum that they get to improve their coverage. Whoever buys NextNav, whether it's AT&T or Verizon or whoever, and they get to say that their coverage is truly nationwide. They're going to be able to fill in the entire map. And so I think it's a great strategic move for a mobile carrier. I think it's a great thing for the government. It doesn't cost taxpayers anything.
Yeah, but just going back to this today versus like what they have today, like why can't that be used for the PNT?
Well,
the current spectrum.
Why can't they go out and get a partner right now for this?
Yeah, like I mean, if they've got 14 megahertz already, what's the difference between this extra one and the realignment? Why go through that other step?
The important step is making it useful for 5G, so the tower heights and the power levels.
Got it. Okay.
And also, so I mean, they're talking about modernizing the 900 band. A term that Brendan Carr uses a lot is like fallow spectrum, and it's like it's not in anybody's interest to let spectrum lie fallow. right? That's really what they're trying to avoid. That was the FCC's problem with EchoStar, right? Were the allegations that they weren't using this public resource for the public benefit, right? And so it's important for the public interest, and it's probably the top FCC priority to make sure that this scarce public resource, the radio frequencies, are being used for the maximum public benefit. And I think that's where NextNav really shines, because their public interest argument is so strong.
Yeah, I guess there's 2 points to your I guess 2 comments to your point, is that, yeah, I getting spectrum out there, but then it's also this, maybe it's conflated with a budget aspect too, that it actually, if you start selling spectrum or licensing spectrum, we start to make a lot of money. And so here we get one, but we're kind of not getting the other because it's kind of in the past and whatnot. But I still, your point's taken, I guess, is
okay. But I mean, what you're talking about, right, from inventory, it's important to note that this 15 megahertz isn't coming all out of inventory, right? This isn't something that the FCC has, right? We're talking about 1 and change megahertz coming out of inventory, being paired with NextNav existing holdings plus a rule change. And you're getting the 5 plus 10 that they hope to end up with. Sure, I think, the big beautiful bill and the talk of the 800 megahertz that are going to be auctioned off, great. I think that probably will raise a lot of revenue for the Treasury. But absent taking what NextNav already has, something that they weren't even willing to do to EchoStar, what is the FCC really giving up? They're giving up 1 3/4 megahertz of 900. I mean, I'm not even sure what price that would fetch, or if that would even be useful to a carrier. From what I've heard, that like a 5 megahertz band is kind of the lower end of what's useful. So yeah, I'm not sure that the government's really giving up all that much.
But when you go from narrow to broadband with a nationwide license, they're applying that to everything they have now. And I think you said earlier this has to just do with power and tower heights and things like that. But obviously, a nationwide broadband license is much more valuable than a bunch of local stuff, right? Narrowband. I guess, could somebody make the argument that by granting that upgrade, or whatever you want to call it, that is a windfall, therefore they owe something because of that? That's something that I'm not quite. So maybe it's like, my point is ridiculous. I don't know, but is that a concern at all?
Yeah, this gets back to the windfall issue. And I think, I'm sure certain people will make that argument. And the argument I would make if I were a NextNav executive, or if I were an FCC staff member, would be like, you have to compare the values, right? What is NextNav giving the country? What's the public interest argument? What's the value of this? I think NextNav, if you read the docket, has made very persuasive arguments that a true backup to GPS is worth tens of billions of dollars. And so that also goes on the scale.
Right. And Calgary, we could keep going here. I'm looking at the clock. It's 1 hour and 10 in. I know we're going to make this 2 parts. Any wrap up points, things that you want to leave us with? Words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom? Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any wisdom, except, watch the docket on the 6th of October, the 29th of October, and the 26th of November. Yeah, I'll be doing the same. You can find me at Calgary Leveen on Twitter. You can also email me, calgary@anhingapartners.com. At the top, Jeff called it Anhinga Capital Partners, I believe, but the name of the firm's Anhinga Investment Partners. And none of this was investment advice. Do your own work, and erase the parts where I look dumb.
Yeah, that's my goal with every one of these, is please erase the parts where I look dumb. Yeah, but this has been great. Calgary, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the idea. I hope we did a good job. We're kind of presenting both sides. There's a lot of moving parts to it for sure, but it's one of those investments that when you really get down into the weeds, it's a fascinating setup, and one that really makes you look at a lot of different things, which I love investments like this, because, it's not just some argument around, oh, it's a great company that has got a great product or service and just own it. I mean, this is something you really need to look at a lot of different players, a lot of different motivations. And I think it's good mentally, even if you don't get involved in the stock, working in investments like this, I think, just makes us better investors, because we have to look at so many different things. But in any event, thank everybody for watching and tuning in. And remember, you can always come to Value Seville, our podcast, and see great guests like Calgary. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Take care.